Welcome everyone, it's Chobra. Now, I posted a video last week on my main channel about how I've been enjoying the Witch Hunter, one of the ascendancies for the mercenary class, and how I would actually highly recommend this character for any newcomers to Path of Exile, similar to myself. I just think the ascendancy passives really make life a lot easier. It kind of simplifies things if you're starting off and trying to learn your way around the mechanics, and you do want to get to the end game, but you're not quite sure how to build up. It just gives you a lot of perks that makes that process a bit easier. Today I just wanted to update you on where I am at with this character because I had a couple questions on that video about what I'm using and how I'm going about it, even if it may not be, the best or the fastest build out there. I've been enjoying it quite a bit. I've been trying to focus on a type of imagery that I have on what I want my Witch Hunter to look like, and so far it's been going pretty well, and I feel like I'm at a decent spot where I feel, okay, now I can get into the actual very end of the end game, right? Pushing tier 15 maps, things like that. So let's jump right in and take a look at where the Witch Hunter has come, or how far it has come so far. So you see here, we've got our very chonky looking Witch Hunter. I do have the cosmetics from the very first upgraded supporter pack, but generally I like to look at what my armor looks like, especially, in the leveling process, or if you're just kind of picking out what you think are good for stats. Sometimes it looks a little silly, and I do enjoy that in a lot of my RPGs. And I actually had no idea this piece of armor looked like this, but I was pleasantly surprised. So we're very chonky. And it goes with the theme because let's take a look at the passive tree first, because that's where it all started for myself. So we've got the Witch Hunter. Don't mind this for now. I was actually trying to go through the Trial of Seconds for my 4th Ascendancy. Didn't get through it once more, so we've been tinkering back and forth on the class ascendancies, or the ascendancy passives, I should say. But we'll get back to that. But just overall, the key points that I was focusing on was I was very drawn by Iron Reflexes halfway through the game, right? Converting all evasion into armor. This idea of, okay, I'm just going to stand my ground and get up close, right? You have a lot of kind of shotgun type abilities on the crossbow, which I've been sticking with, the default weapon here for the mercenary. So I enjoyed the thought of that, and then while I started with grenades, like a lot of people did, just because the explosive grenades in the very beginning of the game were so powerful for the crossbow, and then I discovered full salvo, which is 25% increased damage with crossbows for each type of ammunition fired in the past 10 seconds. So basically you are benefiting from cycling through a lot of your different ammunition skills. Now this is, when it says ammunition, it means the ones that alter your basic attack. So it's not counting things like the grenades or anything like that, but it's when you load, different ammo, like the fragmentation rounds, you got the high velocity rounds, you've got galvanic shards, things like that. And so I like this idea of, okay, I'm like constantly swapping back and forth. I love the reload, like animation and sound of the crossbow. And I've been meaning to stick mostly with the crossbow until we get more weapons, so I can tinker with that in the future. And so eventually I landed on that as kind of my key piece that we're working with. Now, I want to give a quick shout out to this comment right here on your screen from my previous video that was on our main channel on @Chobra. And they made the suggestion that while I had the right idea eventually that I wanted to tinker with different weapon sets, that I should keep in mind that that's doable with 2 crossbows. What's funny is I had thought about that before, right? So one crossbow, because some crossbows have different inherent passives. So maybe one with more grenades, so I can use like a grenade crossbow, and then one with like better attack speed, something like that. Okay, in my head that sounds cool. Or maybe one comes with like lightning damage already built in, and then one comes with fire damage. All right, yeah, I could work with that. But I never actually, for whatever reason, because one of the reasons I wanted to try different weapon sets was the whole passive tree, right, with the weapon set points you see in the top right on your screen here. For whatever reason, I never tied that in with 2 different crossbows, that I could just have 2 branching passive trees, but with crossbows. And so with that suggestion, I got to thinking, okay, well, that actually frees me up a bit, because before I was like trying to, because I like the idea of shock as well, right? So this combination of I want to stand my ground, but I do like the idea of just kind of more explosive physical damage, right? More focusing on what feels like an actual, gun, like an FPS or a third-person shooter, something like that. But then we do have the shock that allows you to do extra damage if you get the debuff on them, the ailment on your enemies. So I want to path a little bit into that, but I want to leave enough points so that I have, more just pure projectile damage, things like that, more attack speed, more reload speed. So then I felt that I was a little strained on the passive tree, but now that we can branch back and forth, that has freed things up quite a bit. So let's just run through the main tree first. It's kind of hard to tell with the colors here because the red, I do hope that they change this, by the way, that the red is a little bit more pronounced on the first weapon set. Because the green is pretty apparent that it's a separate one. But if you look at the main tree that I'm working towards, so we start off with the damage, attack speed. You're going to go with the extra projectile damage here. I do branch off a little bit. Now this is, it's more so you add these on later in the game once you have iron reflexes and a bunch of other things, because purely it's just to boost iron reflexes. And we'll talk about why it's important to boost that. It's not just because you took that that passive node and you have to commit to it, but it ties in with our ascendancy passive with the sorcery ward as well. So we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Go all the way further, more armor, a little bit extra strength and dexterity as well to not just boost your dexterity, but get whatever points of life that we can through the strength points. That's why I also have a lot of strength here, because our armor is going to need a lot of strength points as a requirement. So make sure that that's kind of even on the main passive tree. So even when we're weapon swapping, we're not suddenly like losing access to our armor. This cluster, of course, two-handed weapon, just tons of damage on that. It's just free damage if you're using a two-handed weapon, which crossbows are. And then I take the accuracy rating. This one, we might go back and forth. I don't necessarily need the area of attack, but maybe I'll add this onto somewhere else and get the dexterity some other way. Since we are focusing on a two-weapon build here, the weapon swap speed on both of them is going to be very nice. It does make it quite smooth. There are some panic moments where I'm like, oh man, is it going to come out in time? But other than that, generally, I'm never feeling that I'm sitting there waiting for my other crossbow to come out. You go through, eventually, I actually don't plan to have this move speed and attack speed on kill on both weapons. I think I'll just have it on my elemental or like shock damage crossbow, more or less, the one that I'm using for mapping mostly, whereas the idea in my head is that the physical damage is more so for the bossing. So I might swap that out as a weapon set speed, but right now we don't have our fourth ascendancy up here, which really expands how far more we can branch out. So we just have it on both. It does make things quicker, and this is going to be important later because I'm on a bit of a budget when I was starting off trying to tinker with this build a bit further over the weekend. Anyway, you go all the way down. This one's important, right? Just all the extra reload speed you can get because we are trying to cycle through. That means every time, if you've kind of unloaded all of your ammo and then you're trying to do another cycle, every time you switch, you're going to have to do a full reload. So if it takes longer, not only, are you potentially in danger, but that means that you can't actually fit in maybe one extra type of ammunition in the 10 seconds to maximize your damage on a full rotation. So just get that as much as possible. The whole idea is if you're fighting bosses, you're cycling through. Iron reflexes, we already explained that, changes all your evasion, so you're never going to dodge anything, or not, innately by the evasion stat. Obviously, you can dodge roll, but that does mean you get a lot more armor. Now, there's a lot of talk about armor is bad, armor is just not worth speccing into, and I get why people are saying that. It's also the notation that is a bit confusing, and I feel that, right? Compared to the notation, you definitely don't feel that you get your bang for your buck, but I've at least felt that it has been quite helpful a lot of times, especially when you're getting swarmed by mobs and things like that. And when it comes to bosses, generally, if it looks like it's going to hurt, you should probably dodge roll anyway. So while I agree that they need to tweak armor, I'm not saying that it's fine. I also don't think it's useless per se. Now, again, the armor ties into our sorcery ward as well. It's both armor and evasion, but this kind of goes hand in hand because the sorcery ward, we'll talk about it later, but it's a spell shield for elemental damage. So that takes care of elemental damage, and then the actual armor is going to help take care of some of the physical damage you take. So this is really, listen, in an ideal world, I could go all the way deeper. So I have the, extra small node down here. The ones from the equipment don't matter as much because then you kind of have to make sure that your, armor and your gloves have the right evasion ratings as well to make that conversion worth it. So to me, it wasn't worth the headache. Just get a little bit more, as much as we could afford when we're trying to max out our main tree. We talked about full salvo. You're mostly relying on that as your kind of main damage portion. Another one that's worth noting is Catalysis. 20% increased elemental damage with attacks, but 5% of physical damage from hits taken as damage of a random element. Again, this helps boost Sorcery Ward's value a little bit because that means if I'm taking a physical hit, right? It has to be a hit. It can't be anything like damage over time, right? So bleed and things don't count. But if I'm taking a physical damage hit, now 5% of that is going to apply as a random element. But it doesn't matter which element it is, because the idea is that the sorcery ward is going to soak it up no matter which of the 3 elements it gets converted into. So now that helps, again, mitigate a little bit of the weakness of armor and goes hand in hand. The rest of these are really just to make sure that we can stretch our branches far enough with the without having all 100 points outside of the weapon set specific points right now. So they just go far enough so that I can branch off into the different weapon set trees here. In terms of jewels right now, it's not anything specific. It's just the best I had with what I have. Basically, as long as it had projectile damage, I just slotted it in, right? I said, all right, slot it in. We'll move forward. We can maybe tweak that further later. Now, let's talk about the weapon specific paths. So before we continue, let me just show you the weapons that I have. So the first weapon, and this is kind of my mapping weapon, the Galvanic Shards weapon. I know that's what everybody uses if you're using a crossbow to go through on mapping. But hey, I mean, there's probably a reason. It's pretty good. Now, actually, after this video, I think I do want to deviate from that, because I'm a type of guy who likes to go with a little bit of the quirky stuff, the off-meta stuff, even if it's not the fastest. I like to have some fun. So we'll go with that. But for now, Galvanic Shards, also just the animations and the sound is so satisfying. So we have this Dragon Core Expert Sturdy Crossbow. So it's the Sturdy Crossbow base. And this one, I actually think I didn't need to invest into this. I think I actually bought this off of the trade site. I can't remember. But I remember looking at it and thinking, okay, so... Oh, give me 1 second. Let me just pin that without making our tree go all crazy. All right, so this one, it has... now we put in the runes for the physical damage. It's got pretty decent... it's got pretty good increased physical damage, boosting the main stat. And then it has, additional increased physical damage as well. So it boosts the high end all the way up to 447. It is a pretty big gap, but the high goes pretty high for where I'm at right now. And then it had the increased elemental damage with attacks, which when I first saw it, I was like, okay, in my head, that looks great for me. But then I had to remember that Galvanic Shards actually doesn't have a very high conversion to elemental damage. So this isn't actually a requirement. I mean, it's, it doesn't hurt. And what it will do is that no matter how much Galvanic Shards your skill is actually converting, it will increase, your shock, right? Your shock chance and how much you're stacking it on, because that is based on the actual elemental damage that's going out before the mitigation. So it is going to help, but also it's not something that's going to help like actually kill and clear off the entire map, or maybe some of the rare monsters, things like that. So I'm double backing on this one. I think it's helpful, but maybe not as good as I thought it was. The leech is whatever. The crit damage bonus actually is not too crucial here. In fact, with what I have, we'll take a look at my gloves leader. It's actually completely useless. And then dexterity, again, just another stat that it doesn't hurt to have on the build that we're going for. So really, it's just as long as it has good high damage. When it comes to mapping, right, most of the normals and everything, it's going to melt if you have the right skill set up. It's not a big deal. And now when it comes to rares, if it's too much of a problem, you can always switch to the other weapon, which is going to be for rares and uniques. Now let's talk about our other weapon. It is going to be the Hate Core Expert Dyad Crossbow. So it's the Dyad Crossbow, which wasn't actually on my list initially, because while it loads an additional bolt, the reload time, therefore, is slower, and generally the damage numbers are also lower as well. It has a lower starting base, and in my head, I was like, I want the Forlorn Crossbow because it actually has the highest maximum damage that you can get off of any of the base crossbows. But the more I thought about it, I started tinkering with one of my skills, the high velocity rounds, where you can make it into like a 3-round burst, which means now if I get an extra bolt, it's actually 3 bolts in essence, and that made sense to me. I was like, okay, that's actually good because I'm trying to go for like a burst window here off of crit. So let's see what we could make out of that. So we got some decent physical damage in addition, and then it has the crit hit chance, right? So that's the big one here. This one I did buy off of the trade site because I just wanted something that absolutely had the crit chance. I didn't want to have to wait around to try to slam that onto a crossbow. So this boosts it up to 9.36% base. And then, with the quality and everything, and it had the 3 rune slots as well, so it's got some pretty decent damage. It's not as great as it could be, but it gets the job done for now. Before we move back on to the gear, let's move back then. So what does each weapon use? Well, our mapping weapon, right? Basically our galvanic shards, our shock weapon. We're going to be using Herald of Thunder, so we got the extra damage off of the Herald of Thunder and while the Herald is active. And then we have this cluster that, you know, it's a little bit extra damage, but most importantly, 25% chance for an additional projectile, but actually all the way up to 75% chance for an additional projectile. So in theory, this should be either it's 100% or there's like a 25% and then 75% like separate chance. I actually don't know exactly how that works, but either way, you're going to be forking a lot of projectiles. So you slap that fork on galvanic shards. Now you have this, like, as long as there's a cluster, they're all getting hit and they're all dying. So it's just a way to just absolutely guarantee. And I have this because I kind of want to future-proof in case I don't want to take Zealous Inquisition. Because eventually I want Weapon Master on my Ascendancy passives. Let's see, where else does it branch off into? Let's start with the important ones. So here, you want Flash Storm, right? Increased chance to shock. That's always going to be nice. And then the, you know, increased chance to shock off of this as well. The increased freeze buildup, I actually think might be something that goes well with this, because I do have a little bit of freeze as a get out of jail free card, but also to boost my fragmentation rounds because they do a lot more if the enemy happens to be frozen. And once we had this branch going, I had some extra points, which meant that I wasn't going to get these extra crit chance nodes on my first weapon, on my mapping weapon. So I decided, okay, now Lightning Rod is very valuable because that means it makes any of my non-critical hits lucky, which means it's rolled twice and the better result. So you know how every weapon has that damage range? That means they can roll anywhere in between that. So it's going to give me a better chance of hitting that max, especially with this large of a range on the crossbows. That should be pretty nice. So basically you're getting like a, you know, like a half crit more often. And as it goes, that means we're going to get shock more often. It means we're going to get the burst more often. When we're clearing, this was mostly just for clearing, for mapping, and it's just going to make it a lot smoother so I don't have to like awkwardly stop and fire off one more shot. For the time being, with some leftover points, I just decided, okay, some extra lightning damage into an extra chance of shock, but eventually there's some consideration to actually just go into this cluster so we have greater magnitude and duration, so extend that burst window just a bit further. I think that'll be nice. So that's under consideration. And like I said, I might just swap these to a weapon-specific passive for my first weapon. Now, taking a look at our bossing weapon, so to speak, our physical damage weapon, the big thing is going to be that it's going to be based on crit. So let's start with the crit clusters. You got crit chance, crit chance, crit chance, crit chance. Eventually, obviously, you want all of it. I just don't have the points for it right now because I don't have the Ascendancy passive, which means I'm limited to 24 points, and that's actually been stumping me a bit, which is why I've been very desperately wanting to get that fourth Ascendancy, but the Trial of Succubus has not been good to me. Now, moving over here, I had originally made a mistake by trying to get this entire cluster, because what you'll see, this bottom side gives you crit damage and extra strength, which all seemed nice, right? The strength is going to give me more life, and the crit damage should boost my damage if I'm going for crit. But what we're going to realize is one of our pieces of gear actually fixes our crit damage at a very high number. So you actually don't want any extra crit damage. As much as you can help it, it's a wasted stat if you get it anywhere else because it's not impacting your crit damage anymore as far as I could tell. The equipment, as it reads, is that it's fixed at that number. It doesn't change up or down. For those who don't know, by the way, crit chance in this game, it works off of your base attack crit hit chance, so like your weapon crit hit chance, right? So for instance, my weapon right now, that's why it's important to have that crit chance on the weapon, because my weapon right now has 9.4 or something, right, total. So that's where it starts. So if I get 10%, I'm getting 0.9% added on. It does not mean I'm getting that much closer to 100. It's just, so from 9.4 now I'm going over to 10 point something, and eventually I believe right now that makes me sit at around 30-something% base, and then with this cluster here, where Dispatch Foes gives you 80% increased crit chance if you haven't dealt a critical hit recently. I think eventually, I think this is how I get all the way up to like 35%. So you're sitting somewhere around like the 30% range here with all these nodes and all the equipment that we have. In addition to that, of course, we do have the physical damage cluster. So extra physical damage and armor break, 40% increased armor break, and then 25% increased physical damage. This is good because actually if you max out all of these and you max out the support gems as well, your armor breaking rounds, they do shred armor quite a bit. Even some of the tankier bosses, you know, you should never really go over one entire clip of one entire magazine of ammo. So, you know, that's one way where you can boost it. Now there's, as I'm tinkering with it, we'll get to it, but there's a debate on whether you actually want to fully break armor or not, but that is an option that you have there. Let's talk about the gear first, because I think it kind of helps determine a lot of it. So as someone who's newer to Path of Exile, something that I want to help a lot of players do is, you know, join me in trying to learn how we can navigate this game and learn this game and enjoy this game, right? So listen, if you're in it to find the best builds and chase after that, you're in the trade league, you want to master the trade, the marketplace, things like that, the trade system, the free market, and you want to chase after the best builds, the best times for clearing, that's cool. And, you know, if I figure something out like that, surely I'll share it. But the goal for me is, okay, well, with what we have and the type of enjoyment that we're looking for, how else can you make sure that you're finding the right way to target that enjoyment in this game? And so in terms of building, I tinkered with a lot of different ideas. Initially, I started with an image in my head of what I wanted my witch hunter to be. And that was a decent start, especially for the campaign. You know, it was cool picking up new skills and seeing which one you wanted to use and all of that. The next step for me was I discovered some of these, you know, keystone passives where I was like, okay, iron reflexes, that's cool. I kind of want to focus around that. I want to make a mercenary who can get up close with some of these shotgun rounds and work off of that. Then I discovered what shock does, and I was like, okay, I want to build around that a little bit. Then I discovered full salvo. Like in the middle of it, I discovered repeating explosive, things like that. So I took these steps, but eventually I landed on, okay, I want like a, you know, 1 or 2 nodes on the passive tree that I really like. I like how they work. So for me, it ended up being iron reflexes, full salvo, but iron reflexes specifically because of how it works with Sorcery Ward, which I guess we didn't talk about. We'll talk about it here in a second before we jump into equipment. But basically, I chose those 2, and then I looked for equipment or types of stats on equipment that would complement them very well. And so that was the process that I had. Since I'm on the trade league, I figured, okay, well, why not look for the best that I can afford? I'm not exactly on the rich end of things in the entire free market, but, you know, I got lucky with a couple drops and a couple sales and trades here and there. And so over the weekend, I think at the end of the day, everything all said and done, I spent like 1 divine orb and maybe 15 exalted orbs. So yeah, if you don't have the divine, it might be a little bit more limiting, but there were definitely other options. But first and foremost, it's the gloves. Meligaro's Virtuosity Fine Bracers. These are unique gloves that give you attack speed and crit chance and dex. But most importantly, they also fix your crit damage bonus at 300%. So your critical damage bonus is 300%. So you're getting 300% extra damage on your crit damage whenever you get a crit, which is a lot. That's a lot. But it also comes with the attack speed, which is nice, and the crit chance. Now, these ones, they have the 30% crit chance, so it is a little bit on the high end, right? It's on that max for the range itself without getting corrupted and going further. So that's been nice. These are the ones I believe I bought for Divine, I think. I want to say these are the ones I bought for Divine. Not positive. Obviously, prices can fluctuate a little bit as well, but they weren't corrupted. I was able to get them the quality all the way up as well, and so the evasion is not the highest, but this is my attack stat right here. Now on top of that, I ran across this piece of unique armor that I just thought was interesting, but I thought it might complement my whole idea of iron reflexes with Sorcery Ward quite well. So the brass dome. Now this one is fun because it gives you massive increased armor, but it actually, you take a hit to your elemental resistance. So it just deletes the top part of your maximum elemental resistance. But then you also don't take any extra damage from critical hits. So now the enemies just cannot crit you. And then you get the stun threshold, which is not too important for us. It's not as important for us. So right now with the runes and everything, this piece alone gives me 1993 armor. But it's just overall a lot of armor that we're getting off of this one piece. Now, you take the elemental resistance hit. But again, if I have Sorcery Ward, which you can see up here, right now it's at 1346, but any elemental damage from hits is taken from that buff, right, from the shield before it goes to my life. So yeah, while the, lacking a little bit of max elemental resistance is going to hurt for sure, but in an ideal world, it's actually getting taken away. My shield's kind of taking the hit, and then it gets depleted, but it recharges off of a cooldown, and then hopefully I take them out, and then I recharge the cooldown, and the cycle continues. So that's the idea we worked with. The rest of it, I actually have a lot of strength here and there and maximum life, just to try to get my life up. I would like to get life over 2,000, just because otherwise, right? I mean, damage over time, things like that, it's still going to hit me pretty hard. So we've got life and a lot of stats here on this amulet. That one was bought. I can't remember for how much, but this was in the previous weekend before that, so it wasn't too much. This helm, I believe I've had on my own for quite some time now, so it has crit chance, it's got fire resist and chaos resist, so I wanted to work that in. One of these rings I had, and one of them I bought, but I can't remember which, but they're both pretty nice. But basically, you just want to even things out. Now, in some ways, it makes it easier, because now your max elemental resist is actually capped at either 70 or, in my case, because it's corrupted, 71. So it's a bit lower, right? The maximum threshold you have to hit is a bit lower, but I'm not really looking for too much else. And the boots are something I want to talk about. So if you're like me and you want to go towards build, but you're not too deep into the trade yet, or you're not quite at the end game, so you can't farm as much crazy good equipment, which, by the way, you can still farm stuff in the trade league earlier on, right? Like good bases and things that you can sell for sure. It's doable. You just start slow, and then you start stacking up and you rack them up, and it starts to build up quite a bit as an economy. But if you can't do that, right, or maybe you're just a little cautious, you're like, well, I don't want to shell out everything. You can take some hits on certain priorities. So, for instance, movement speed is a premium stat right now, right? Everyone's like, movement speed is a necessity. As long as it exists, it's 35% max that you can get on the boots. So you want at least 30, but if 35, like, that's great. That's premium. Like, you want that. Otherwise, it feels slow. But on average, like, if you're working off your own drops, you probably want like a 20 or a 25. Anything lower is too slow. You get used to it. How are you going to get through mapping? Mapping is all about speed. And I get that. It is all about speed. You want to get through as fast as possible, because that way you farm more. But also, unless you're chasing to be, I don't know, at the top of the leaderboard in one way or another, whether it's through trading or through clearing bosses, etc., chances are surviving is just more important for you. Just living is a bit more important. And movement speed can help. It can help, but if you're not able to find the right resistances, then you're gonna get hit by things. So I decided, you know what? I mean, I'm trying to make this fantasy work of I'm a chonky boy. I can take a couple hits and then I fire back with the different bolts that I have on my crossbow. So in theory, I'm okay with the slower move speed, which suddenly drops the prices a lot more. It makes it a lot more feasible to get something like this that has on average 30% across all three elements. And it has maximum life as well. So that was big for me. So I specifically searched for something with lower movement speed. So just keep that in mind. I would say just keep in mind, like, what is it that you really want to enjoy? Like, if speed is where you get your pure enjoyment, like you're like Sonic, you got to go fast. It doesn't matter if you're dying. You just want to jump right back in and go fast again. That's cool. Like, that's your priority. But if you're like, well, I would love to go fast. Trust me, I would love to go fast. But I also just would like to not die and loot and fight bosses and take one map at a time. Consider taking a hit for the time being, because those are chase stats that you want, right? Those are the premium stats that you want to go for in the end game. So it's okay for them to be on the back burner just a bit. Is there anything else that was really crucial to mention? I do have the extra charm slot here. I've been actually utilizing it quite a bit, I feel. I've definitely noticed the impact that my charms have. It also allows me to basically have one as a rotating slot for the situation as it calls, and then just the chaos resist. So that has been good. We talked about our weapons beforehand, and that means we can now talk about our skills finally. So first of all, just to let you know what the move speed looks like with only 10%. It's going to look slow compared to everybody else, but quite frankly, I've gotten used to it. And it's kind of nice because now I just pretend I'm a slow-moving tank when I'm mapping, and I just walk up to people and just galvanic shards them. So taking a look, The reason we have two weapons is because we have the weapon sets in the passive tree, but also you can specify which weapons are using which skills. So to do that, if you didn't know, you press this arrow on your skill window, press on the arrow, and right at the bottom here, you can see use weapon set 1, 2, or both. So as an example, I have Flash Grenade on both because that's my get out of jail free card, so I want it available on either one. But Galvanic Shards is specifically want to use with my mapping weapon because that is built for it with the passive tree and the weapon itself. So Galvanic Shards, you know, this is your shotgun. It has kind of its built-in chaining with the lightning beam, and then to really amplify that, it's just meant to clear a bunch of mobs at the same time. I'm putting on fork on it, so it's going to fork off into 2 extra targets. And then remember, on the passive tree, we had extra chances to fork, so that's going to continue to hit more targets. Then I make sure that it has increased chances to shock, extra lightning damage, and then attack speed, just to make sure that like my mapping is smooth, right? That I'm just never getting like caught in between rounds or whatever. It's pretty fast to begin with. I don't think this is necessary, but for me it was just a quality of life thing. Emergency reload we will talk about later, because mostly I'm using it for my other weapon. Now my other weapon, the cream of the crop here for weapon set number 2, is going to be high velocity rounds. Oh, that's not it. High velocity rounds is on cue. So normally this is the one that's just a single shot, kind of the quote-unquote sniper rifle. But right now we have a triple burst thanks to scatter shot. So each one does 20% less, but you're firing off 3. So that's 240% if you hit with all of it. So it's a lot more damage. It is a little bit slower, but I would say because it's a burst, the burst itself isn't slower. It's just the in-between that's ever so slightly slower. Now, you add in double barrel. By default, now that gives you 2, so 6 hits, right? So 2 3-round bursts by default. And then we have another one because of the diode crossbow. You see where it's going now. And then I have a way to just maximize the top end of the physical damage. So if I get lucky, and this is going to make sure that I extend that maximum damage ever more, right? So if you look, right, so 394 here, it's going to add on a little bit more margin on that end. So if I hit that and the crit, it really starts to boost my damage, although there is a little bit of RNG involved. And then Brutality, just more physical damage. This is important to note. You don't want any elemental damage on this weapon if you're going to use Brutality, because otherwise that elemental damage just gets erased. And then last but not least, Emergency Reload. Instantly reload your crossbow and empowers the loaded bolts. So there's 2 ways you can use this. The original idea is that it's primarily used for high velocity rounds. So right now, with the diode, well, there I got lucky because I have the passive on the passive tree where it might not consume a bolt, so sometimes I get 4 shots with it. But in theory, I should get... Okay, well, we got lucky again. So in theory, you can get either 3 or 4 rounds, which means 9 or 12 hits with high velocity rounds. But if I have emergency reload, basically what you can do is, let's say you get your shock on there and then you've broken their armor, which we'll talk about that interaction in a little bit, but maybe they're stunned, so now I'm just railing away. I get the 5, and then I emergency reload, and I'm immediately going through another 9 to 12 hits, and those will be empowered. So basically, within that burst window that you want, you can really maximize your damage. Now, this is on a fairly long cooldown right now with the cooldown reduction off of the quality. It's at, where is it? 32 seconds. Originally, it's 45 seconds, but it's not too bad. Another way you can use it is when you're mapping, right? If you're just getting swarmed, or let's say you're doing something like a breach and you really, like, they all start swarming you and you need to get through that screen real fast to move on to the next, you can even use it off of Galvanic Shards where you're using it, and then immediately you emergency reload. Now you've got 78 more rounds of Galvanic Shards, which basically should delete the screen because it's now empowered as well. So it's just a really handy-dandy tool to boost your damage every 30 seconds. You just have to get in the habit of using it pretty liberally while you're mapping. Now, one thing I kept mentioning was the armor break. Now, why do I mention that? Well, high velocity rounds, it does extra damage against fully broken armor, but it will consume that debuff on the enemy. Now, you can see it boosts it quite a bit. But remember how we have scatter shot on here? It's actually going to get consumed immediately on the very first round that hits out of the 3. So it's not the full triple shot that applies. It's going to consume the fully armor break, and then that enemy is going to have full armor again for the second and third hits. So I've been tinkering with this. I think on bosses, like, if you don't want to think about it too much, obviously just break them. You know, it's a nice boost on that first shot, and then the rest of it, you're still looking to get high damage. You're relying on hopefully getting more crits. But I've been starting to think that maybe, like, if they have a lot of armor, it's almost okay to intentionally stop in the middle just so you're cycling through more bolts for your full salvo passive. And then just doing more damage while they have like half broken armor, right? So that you're getting rid of some of the mitigation. And then eventually you fully break it, and then you get the nice burst. So there's something to consider right there. The other important thing to remember is that basically the idea is you actually want to break their armor first. So you break it with your armor breaking rounds, then you get your galvanic shards, and most of the time you want to be up close, so you get the shock applied onto them, because shock has a lower duration, or shorter duration. Then you switch to fragmentation rounds, you get the full physical damage off of the armor break before you consume it, and then you consume it with the high velocity rounds. So that's the cycle. I actually haven't done it quite perfectly almost ever, but that's the theory. So again, this build came up with the idea that I wanted to be kind of up close and personal. I liked the idea of constantly swapping back and forth between rounds, even if it's not like the most the quickest or the most efficient way to farm. But to me, that's been the fun part. Try to utilize as many crossbow bolts as I can. And also just enjoying all the different sound effects and the sound designs that the crossbow has to offer. And I've been enjoying it quite a bit. The mapping's been fairly smooth. The bossing, I think, still is a little iffy. Like, if I get lucky with the crits, it goes by real quick, but other times it is a bit of a slog. So I'm trying to figure out how to tweak that further. But if you have any suggestions, would love to hear them down in the comments below. But in the future, I think I might try a different type of mercenary build, or I've been in my head tinkering with a chronomancer build that I want to try, so that might be what's coming up next in our future video. But let me know if you have any cool ideas that you would love to discuss here on the videos today, and of course, if you have any suggestions for this crossbow build, definitely leave it down in the comments below. And if you're new around here, I would love to have you subscribe to the channel and join us, because this is a second channel that I made just to have a little bit more fun and freedom talking about the different games I enjoy playing in my own time, like Path of Exile 2. And so I hope you join us on this journey. That's going to be it for now. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.
Dead. Let's go! What's this?